you'd expect a conference like this after the majority that Keir Starmer got to be absolutely sort of popping champagne cork sort of occasion. And in the hall, you get the euphoria, the standing ovations. But come away from the hall, talk to senior figures in the party, and there is a miserable mood. They're fed up that the media machine at the top of the party has not corrected, as they see, sort of false equivalent stories that are out there comparing the sort of freebies that maybe senior figures in the Labour Party have been having with previous scandals of a bygone era. They feel generally that the messaging that they're being given to explain to people what Labour is about in government. One cabinet minister described it to me as a hideous word blancmange. There is gloom about what's happening there, and there is gloom about the way that the universality of the winter fuel allowance was removed. And that has made for a fairly sort of awkward start to this conference. It should be a celebration, but the winter fuel payments cut has proved to be a grim backdrop for a string of headlines about Labour's most senior figures accepting freebies. Tickets, clothes, holiday apartments. Not what Angela Rayner wanted to talk about on day one of conference.
I get that people are angry and I get that people are upset.
But you're not going to change the rules?
I think that the transparency is there so people can see that.
Delegates in the hall were determined to cheer up their deputy leader with a welcome that brought a deep intake of breath.
Thank you. I'll try not to get too emotional, but...
Party apparatchiks have modified what they acknowledge may have sounded like a gloomy message about tough times ahead. Angela Rayner piloted the lines to take in her address to conference.
So let me be blunt. We can't wish our problems away. We have to face them. That's the difference between opposition and government. But conference things can get better if we make the right choices.
News that she had borrowed a New York apartment for a holiday came after headlines about Keir Starmer accepting substantially more free gifts and hospitality than any other MP. The Education Secretary today defended her free Wimbledon and Taylor Swift tickets.
Look, I'll be honest, it was a hard one to turn down. I appreciate there was big demand for the tickets. It was a privilege to be there. One of my children, was keen to go along. It's hard to say no if you're offered tickets in those circumstances, but it was declared.
Take pride in what you've achieved, but as you celebrate, a little warning. Stay off the glitter. It is now treason to throw glitter on me. And although we're short of prison places, we do have one or two in the tower.
Keir Starmer referenced the campaigner who jumped on the stage last year at what felt like a happier conference, even though Labour was in opposition. The selfie was with London Labour Party. But he hasn't got his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, by his side, here attending Labour conference in Liverpool last autumn. The sniping against her from within his government has reached a level that leaves many thinking she may not last in post. All the sort of headlines he will hate, and which many senior party figures here say Keir Starmer needs to kill off quickly with action, rhetoric and grip.
Well, joining me now here in Liverpool is the Business and Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. This row over freebies, there's leaks coming out of Downing Street after just 80 days. Is this a pretty dysfunctional government?
No, it is not. And what we are trying to get across at conference is that the change that we were voted on to deliver has begun, whether that is building new homes, getting on with putting in a real living wage, whether it is lifting the ban on onshore wind. We are delivering upon that agenda and want to point people towards the better future. And look, of course, you always get bits of information coming out of government, particularly when you're running up to something like a budget. But what we are doing is getting on with that job. And the only test of success or failure of this government will be, have we delivered at the end of this term?
Well, you talk about change, but a lot of voters might look at what's happening with the row over freebies and sleaze and think it sounds quite familiar with the last government. I mean, now Keir Starmer and his senior ministers have said they won't take free clothes anymore. Shouldn't that also apply to hospitality? Ministers should pay for their own hospitality.
Well, first of all, on the issue around what gifts, what invites people get, We have some very clear rules on transparency. If people are asked to go to something in a work capacity as a government minister or as a shadow government minister, which always happens, as long as they declare it, I think that is the right thing to do.
It's not work, though, is it? It's leisure. I mean, Keir Starmer accepting tickets to football or other events worth tens of thousands of pounds, and there you have the government pledging to introduce a football regulator. There's a clear conflict of interest there, potentially, isn't there?
No, I don't think there is, actually. I think if you are, first of all, the Prime Minister, I think going along to see the team you support, you can't really walk through the turnstiles. I've no problem whatsoever with that. The fact that we are still proceeding with something which is contentious in some quarters around regulation of an industry, that kind of proves the point, that there is no conflict because we're proceeding with that legislation. And just on your ask about...
He's accepted a freebie from a club that has a real stake in this decision on the regulator.
But that's why the transparency that's there is absolutely right. And look, he's going because he supports that football team. There's no other agenda there. It's well known that that is something that's a big part of his life, something he enjoys. I actually want the Prime Minister to have, whoever that Prime Minister is, a little bit of something in their life which is special to them.
Sure, but he can pay for it himself. Well, I mean, you say you can't go through the turnstiles, but you took free tickets for Sheffield Wednesday and an FA Cup final. You don't have the security problem that your leader has. So what's your excuse?
Well, you get invited to loads of things. Those are, in the main, going to see my own club, Sunderland. If I'm in an area somewhere I can catch the club, it's not always that enjoyable, but that is important to me.
But you earn something like £160,000. Can't you pay for yourself?
Well, obviously, these are not when I was a cabinet minister, just to be absolutely
clear. Okay, so now would you refuse those tickets?
Well, look,
pay yourself?
I would get, if I'm invited to something, I would declare it in exactly the way the rules dictate. But can I just ask you about your point?
Why not dig into your own pocket?
Well, because if you're invited in that capacity, you're being offered something you can't buy, can you? I mean, if you're invited to, for instance, be at the director's box in Arsenal, you can't just have that.
But then you're corruptible then, aren't you?
No, I don't think so. I think that's why the transparency rules are as they are. And look, ministers, people in public life have always been invited to things. You say no to the vast majority of it where you are invited. But can I just come back to your point about change? Because I think, the Prime Minister going to see Arsenal, declaring that in the proper way, is in no way the same thing as the kind of corruption we saw with the last government around COVID contracts where donors were getting things other people got.
Different order of sleeves.
No, I think that is a completely different thing. And I think to kind of conflate the two things would be dangerous. We saw something there which was totally unacceptable. This is all transparent, a personal interest in a sporting event, that's fine.
It may be transparent, but look, you faced allegations of conflict of interest when you and your wife went to Glastonbury at the invitation of Google, and then just after that, you abandoned the plan to tax the digital giants more.
That's actually not true. I'm really pleased you've raised that, because that is not true. First of all, I'm not in charge of tax policy, and the clarification that story was based on was the fact that the digital services tax was a temporary measure by the last government that will exist until the minimum global corporation standard policy, which we support, is in place. All that happened was we clarified what our existing policy was. There was not a change. And things
was it a mistake in hindsight, though, to take those
No,
tickets?
I think that the creative industries are a massive part of the economy. It's obviously a nice thing to go to. I've been to Glastonbury, I think, once every 22 years. I don't think that's somehow some inappropriate influence.
Would you pay for yourself from now on?
I don't think anyone who goes to an event, as long as they declare that openly, fairly, transparently, I have no problem with that from colleagues.
You'll carry on taking the freebies. Jonathan Reynolds, thank you very much for joining us.